That's here from our libraries, our trustees, our directors, employees of the system. Today we have Tracy Reiki, who is a new director at the Nicolay Federated Library System. She is on the CRC, which is the Core Recommendation Collaborators Group. And then we have John Thompson from Indian Head Federated Library System. He is the most senior sole library system director in Wisconsin out of the 16. And he's also the chair of the steering committee for the entire PLSR project. Is there anything else you'd like to add before?
No.
No. Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, I have a huge slide deck, it'll take hours and hours. Trying to condense thousands of pieces of documents. We have about an hour and a half-ish, I think, before something else has to go on in this room. So, I will keep you that long or shorter, depending on what you have for questions. How many of you are completely familiar with all the background information of the PLSR project? Okay. So.
Oh, how is that? Is that a little better for the?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, just don't fall asleep. Or don't, keep it interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
So basically PLSR is a multi-year project. We are in the final recommendation development phase, which will be handed off to the state superintendent sometime this summer. That's the plan anyway. But if we need more time, we have permission to take more time. So we are really looking at how services are delivered from the 16 library systems currently that we have to the 380 plus libraries in Wisconsin. So we are looking at service models to help govern the services that we provide. As you can see, most the systems range from 1 county all the way up to 10 counties, anywhere from 2 public libraries in one system all the way up to 54 public libraries in South Central. So there's a vast difference in the size and geography of the systems. This is all of us that are on the steering committee. We do represent a diverse group of sizes, regions, and expertise. The CRC, there are 10 individuals on there. Again, they represent different size libraries in different parts of the state, as well as a couple of system folks on there. We thought PLSR wasn't enough of an acronym, so we threw in the CRC. We're going to create a couple more as we go along, just because we don't have enough acronyms in Wisconsin library communities. What we really are focusing on, part of this is equity. How we can provide service to the libraries so that they can fulfill their missions to the patrons in the state of Wisconsin. So what we're looking at is how we provide services to libraries in Wisconsin so that regardless of where you're located in the state of Wisconsin, you have access to the resources and services you need as a public library to operate. So we're looking at that as the focus. Like I said, we are in the recommendation development phase of this process. We are working with the CRCs to develop a recommendation. We have come up with 2 preliminary recommendations that we have sent out to the library community for feedback. So how did this all come about? We've had our first telephone call on the 28th. It kind of laid the groundwork for our first in-person meeting on the 18th. So imagine 20 people sitting on a telephone, having a conversation when they've never met each other. And some of us, well, you know, Tracy's relatively new, so she probably knew 4 other people on the phone call. The rest of us she didn't know. So we're trying to have a conversation and share expectations of meeting in person 2 weeks later. So it was kind of a challenge.
It was a challenging conversation, but we did, and we had a lot of homework, I will say, prior to this. So all of us who were on the who were CRCs were given for 7 weeks, I think it was, prior to this first phone meeting, we were given homework on a weekly basis so that we could, and it was quite extensive. So, so that we could read up on the work group reports and read up on the history. So we also had a lot to talk, we had a lot to talk about. We had a lot of, incorporated a lot of information before that first phone call. So it was good.
Since you identified Equalizing Services as the main goal of the project, were there some services that were found to be deficient as to why this is being carried out?
Yeah, so we're not really looking at necessarily equalizing services. We're looking at trying to bring services up for everybody.
Well, it's an equity.
Yeah, so we're not trying to get it all here, we're trying to have access as best we could. So examples would be some systems provide 5-day-a-week delivery to all their libraries at no cost to libraries. Some systems are only able to do that 3 times a week. Some systems only pay for 2 days a week. Some systems are struggling to make that happen. In terms of consulting, some system directors are the CE coordinator, the library administration coordinator, the exclusive services consultant, the technology consultant, the youth services consultant, and or whatever other combination they have. Other systems have staff that are dedicated to administration consulting, youth services consulting, and exclusive services, CE, and so on. So there isn't a similar access to expertise within each of the systems for consulting.
Tech services is another area where some systems will have one tech person who goes out and manages, 6 libraries, and other systems will have one tech person who goes out and manages the tech at 42 libraries. So that's another area where there was some difference.
And then there are some systems that have no tech support.
Right.
Other than they have a network, but their individual libraries are on their own for individual in-library support. So there's that whole variation there. So then when we got together on the 18th, we looked at 3 service models that were created just to kind of be discussion starters. One was sort of a little enhanced of what we have now. One was kind of in the middle of the road, and one was a relatively radical change. So each of there were 3 groups that were divided into look at each of the 3 models and kind of say, okay, what's good about this? What can be changed? Pros and cons, all those types of things, as well as how they looked at design principles. So the steering committee had a set of design principles, try to minimize the negative impact on the cost for libraries, trying to make sure that we didn't create another set of winners and losers out of this whole process. So we evaluated all of those. We took a straw poll at the end of that day, and we just said, okay, which one of the 3 did you like the best, and so on. We did that after each conversation, so we didn't know what the results were from any one of those models before we voted on the next model. Our facilitators saved those straw votes until our next meeting that we had on the 8th of June, so we really didn't know how we voted. At that meeting on the 8th, there was a 4th model that was introduced from a CRC member, which was one of the tasks that we had said after the 18th. If you come up with a different model, bring it to the 8th. If you have big tweaks to the models that were presented, bring them to the meeting as well. So we had a 4th model. We did the same process as a large group and looked through that 4th model to look at the strengths and all those kinds of things, and then again looked at it and took a straw vote on that one as well. So out of that, Model Y, which was a 6 to 8 library regional system, kind of based around the delivery service hubs that was in the workgroup report, received the most votes at 155 points. And then Model W, which was kind of an enhanced current system model, received 124 votes. Out of that, those two models were put forth to have further discussion that day. Again, look at what could be done to improve the models and just kind of rebuild them a little bit to see if there's other things that we could add on to them. When we were done, we had looked at all these kinds of things. Again, we took a straw poll, and Model Y came out with 136 points, and Model W came out with 130.5 points. So those are the two models that are out there right now for public conversation.
The straw poll was 1 to 10, someone voted with a 0.5.
Somebody voted with a 0.5, and the meeting before, somebody put a -1 in there.
Oh, okay.
And a 0, and so we
Librarians.
the facilitator set a scale from 1 to 10, but obviously some librarian created their own Dewey Decimal System or some other piece with that. So
Yeah.
we'll blame somebody for it. So what we do have out right now is comments that we are taking off of those two models. The comment forms are based on similar types of questions that the CRC and steering members answered about the model. So we're really trying to get parallel information from the library community. And when we're talking library community, it's staff, directors, system board, library boards, everybody. So if you have thoughts on the models, please feel free to share them. We're also going to take feedback today or answer any questions as well. So you'll have that opportunity to do that now. But again, that form is out there. So a couple of things to note about the two models. They're not identical in terms of formatting. There are two different constructions of the models. Model W had a specific budget reference to it. Model Y, when it was created, did not have a budget reference to it because that was not part of the original charge to create a budget for those individual models. It was really a starter point. So when you're looking for comment, look at the big picture concepts of the models to say.
Right, they're not really apples to apples when you look at them, so you kind of have to look at each one independently. And also there's, I think you have this on there too, but it's good to look at them and know that they're not complete, like they're sort of an overarching format, and then into them will be worked the work group suggestions and proposals. We'll see how those will fit into the different models. And then both of them still have funding pieces that need to be considered as well. So they're by no means a final product.
So basically, Model W maintains the current 16 system construction. They're looking at improvement of funding with a funding formula change and a budget increase in the next biennium budget for systems. And then the other consideration that they have in there is mandatory systems services, that systems would have to provide a certain level of services for each of the service areas that are required. So right now, systems in statute are required to have, I think, about 10 core services that systems are supposed to be providing to libraries that are mandated in statute. The level at which the library systems provide those can vary by system, partly because of funding, some based on geography, some based on local needs, but they're all supposed to be met at a certain level. Mm-hmm. Other things that systems provide, the in-library technology support, email, wide area network, an ILS. None of those specifically are mentioned as mandatory system services. Those are services that systems have built to the benefit of their member libraries that fit under a very catch-all statement in the statute. Says any other services developed by a system in conjunction with member libraries to support member libraries. So that's how some of that stuff has come about, but it's not one of those core ones that they specifically spell out in statute. And so the Model W would basically keep the current system, board structure, system staff structure, and then it's recommending any existing statewide services have service advisory groups. Model Y realigns the systems based on the delivery service hubs that is recommended in the delivery workgroup model. Right now it calls for 8, but there's a possibility that 2 systems might be merging ILSs, and that may change delivery service hubs, or some other future mergers could change that hub's structure, or there may be additional hubs that get added on depending on what the volumes are. So it's kind of just loosely based on that framework. There's also in the workgroup reports some statewide level services that they're recommending. So Model W includes a representational governance body, some sort of state librarian, or it could be a team leader of the management staff that's recommended in the workgroup reports. So they were looking at in the delivery workgroup, for example, they have a part-time statewide delivery manager who's not connected to any of the current systems or delivery organizations in the state, so it's kind of an independent third party that would manage statewide delivery.
So some of this, you can see has come about because back when library systems started, they just sort of built from the ground up and did whatever worked for their area, but things have changed time-wise, and some things like continuing education, a lot of it is online now, and it doesn't always make sense for every single system director to be an expert at continuing education or consulting for new library building use. So, part of it is looking at groups, is looking at like an overarching library resource that can be providing continuing education online resources to all the library systems, or can be the place that can be providing consulting services for building new libraries to all the library systems. So that's one piece of that.
But Will's already provides consulting, so I don't know why we need to hire another one when we can already have that through the Will system. And continuing ed, they also have some stuff and advantages there, so I guess I don't understand why we need to pay another person when we already have something in place.
Yeah, Will's does have some of that.
Yeah. So continuing education is a mandated system service. So as a system, we're supposed to be providing that. And there are several library systems in the state that have specialized consultants in certain areas. And that service is not necessarily available to everybody in the state. So whether we add another layer of funding on for some of those statewide consultants, or there are efficiencies gained in the process that would help pay for that. Those are things that we're still working out through that. But Wills is a non-profit service organization for the state. Their staff is limited just like all of everybody else's staff. So, with 380 libraries, they can't be everywhere for everybody. They do a lot of strategic planning for libraries. They have done some consulting work for some systems with ILS type stuff. Right now, there are several regional CE networks. The southeastern part of the state has a network where multiple systems are part of the same CE network. There are several webinar series that are coordinated centrally, but are funded by most of the systems in the state. So there are things going on in the state collaboratively already. The Overdrive project is one where all the systems are partnering as part of WPLC to put that piece out there. And depending on individual systems, some systems are paying a share of that, or it's being built to the member libraries. and paying it that way, so that does vary.
And
as well.
Wills is a piece of that, you know, Wills is definitely a piece of that continuing education that's happening, yeah.
So why do we necessarily need to keep continuing ed? Because as far as I know, only directors, I'm not sure if system directors need to do continuing ed, but there's really only 2 positions in a public library that are required to have continuing ed credits to retain their position.
Right?
So I mean, is it even a necessary evil anymore?
So I guess the flip side of that is, so there's a new literacy initiative in a multi-county area. And there's training involved and education involved in that. Who does that?
We have a literacy one-on-one person in our library.
But if it,
But they may not be willing to do that for all the libraries.
Right, but
But-
again,
Yeah.
for our library,
certainly-
we have a one-to-one literacy program.
but that's for that person to the public, right? So who's helping the libraries develop a literacy program? How does that get built?
We did it on our own.
Right, but if there's a partnership that needs to occur, that's where the training and the education, that's where the CE is. So it's, the CE offerings are not, in most systems, are not limited just to the directors. They're limited to pretty much any staff member. Not everybody has access to go to a library conference. Not everybody has time to take a class that's multi-week, you know, like some of the UW classes, and they just want to focus 3 hours or 6 hours out of the day with their colleagues to build something collectively, and that's where, you know, some of that CE stuff comes in.
It also keeps you, I mean, as far as like, you're correct that not all the positions are required to do CE, but keeping some required CE in definitely keeps the leaders of those organizations current on advocacy, current on legal changes, current on new trends. And then, you know, the hope is, of course, that those library directors will be passing that knowledge down to their other library staff. And then the continuing education pieces are offered oftentimes not just to library directors, but anyone can take them. And quite a few library staff they do utilize that as professional development.
I was just speaking devil's advocate.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I mean, that's what, you know, I mean, that is kind of the point, is PLSR has been really looking at all sorts of those things, so, yeah.
So, excuse me, I came from a state in which there was a state librarian, and I see that that's involved in this, model, and I'm just curious in what you think the advantages are.
Well, the way this one is kind of framed is that it's not necessarily this hasn't been distinguished to say this is a state employee that's doing this. It's somebody in a layer above the systems, kind of setting the service tone for services provided to libraries. So it's kind of a,
It's one more layer.
well, it's
It's
another
not
layer, but
necessarily-
it's trying to create service expectations, not only the ones that are written on paper, but just even service philosophy. So it's kind of a way of saying, okay, we want quality communication, we want systems being responsive to the needs of the libraries, reaching out and having those communication types of things. I think the results from the surveys and some of the various reports that have been out there is people are concerned about having the ability to communicate. And in some places that between system boards, system staff, and member libraries doesn't exist very well. And if it does exist, some of them feel they're not being heard. So,
And a lot of things are, the libraries are sort of underfunded and overbusy in a lot of areas, so this would be someone who would sort of have, the overview of the library, world's best interest in mind. So, you could see where their piece could be, kind of overseeing these state resources that we're talking about, which would be like a CE portal or a consulting portal. And then also, probably, keeping their eye on changes in legislative law and areas where we could advocate, working with that area too. So it would be, someone who could connect people to the right resources. Because as I said, some of it is, some of the communication issues are largely because, libraries are overbusy and underfunded, so that makes it challenging for everyone.
This is kind of like going back to before the DPI got gutted funding wise and people retired or quit or moved on or whatever. We used to be able to consult the DPI for these kinds of services and coordination.
Yeah, right. That's that too is another area where things are overbusy and underfunded.
Right.
I mean so it is kind of adding that back in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Look, I would just say that position can do everything that you say, but it also can become very political position to the detriment of the library world, where it just gets hooked up with things and creates a lot more conflict instead of smoothing things out.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the concept of having some sort of state library board and some or service advisory groups, is to have that position more connected to the library
Right.
professionals and not to
And less to a state organization.
the politics of it. So the DPI right now has no authority to add positions. So they don't have the ability to say, we're gonna add all of these to their staff. So this is kind of another,
Be a new organization.
kind of a new organization, and some of these, we haven't defined who's going to do this. So, for example, collections really is focusing on electronic resources and digitization. A lot of that is already occurring within WPLC that's managed by Wills. Interlibrary loan right now is actually being managed with WSCAT through the state. So this may be, when this is all done, if this is the model that comes out of it, some sort of mix, some sort of hybrid that gets developed. We haven't gotten that far. We've only kicked these models around twice, and we haven't gotten into all the details. That's what we hope to get some of the feedback between now and the 20th of July. July 30th and 31st is going to be plugging in more details. Most likely what we're going to be doing is doing that in parallel construction between the two work group models.
Okay, I don't know if you're going to get to this in your slide deck, so I just want, from your perception, and this is regardless, I guess, of the model, taking technology services and breaking it up into 3 regions in the state seems to me like a really backwards way to do something when the ratio of IT person to libraries is a problem, and now I think creating larger regions is not going to be helpful.
So,
Especially when we have all different systems that have developed different software that they use, different networks, different ILS, all different things tying in.
yeah, so the ILS piece, right now, the work group recommendation is to pretty much keep the ILS networks the way they are, but encouraging some of them to merge if it makes sense. The technology regions that are kind of out there aren't necessarily where the people are going to be to go into the individual libraries. So their recommendation in their report is to kind of create a statewide data center so that servers are virtualized in an area that really would only require network engineers and that layer to be in a physical location to support them, but all the tech support people going into the individual libraries would be put in different
those
areas.
hubs,
Then-
whether it's the 16 or the 8.
I just thought looking at the number of technicians that would be available just seemed like a reduction. Well, maybe it's not a reduction for people who don't have anything, but
Right, no, I think,
for us, I think it would take a service that we have right here and push it further
I
out.
think the intent is it's that higher level of technicians that would be in the 3 spaces, and then wherever the hubs were, whether it was the 16 systems or the 8 systems, would have your more localized technicians that would go out to the individual
so
libraries.
how many on the ground how many technology people do you have in there? Okay,
And we also don't have a network. We don't have servers. We don't need that kind of stuff. We don't need those services.
your ILS server's hosted somewhere?
Oh, the cloud. In the
It's
cloud,
cloud, okay.
yeah.
And then your email server is somewhere else, that's cloud-based?
That's cloud-based. Everything's cloud-based,
Okay,
basically, except for telemessaging.
okay. So your tech person does whatever she needs?
Everything.
Okay.
Pretty much.
And
she smiles.
when she's sick,
I do it from home.
when you're sequestered on jury duty?
We haven't run up against
Yeah,
that.
so,
When she retires, that's the real, that's
well,
the
and
issue.
see, that's the issue, so,
Yeah. How many libraries do you have?
6, 5.
See, our tech, we have 1 tech person at 42 libraries.
yeah, so, you know, in our case, we have a network person and then we had a on-the-ground tech person, and they can overlap. Well, the one person was on vacation in an area where there's no internet service. Our other tech staff person got called into jury duty. We have no tech support for 53 public libraries. So the concept is that there would be redundancy in
We
tech
also
support.
have a contract though with someone that could help us out in the absence
Yeah.
of marketing services.
But you're really in essence dealing with 6 libraries.
Mhm.
So that ratio
It's favorable.
is favorable there,
Yeah.
but there are other situations where, you know, technology innovation, there are still physical networks out there, all those or internal networks within, you know, internet connection goes down, the router goes bad in the library. Who's responsible for fixing the route or replacing the router in the library? Yeah, so,
Yeah, and I think the point is like to, instead of having, you know, all the different systems have sort of things pieced together to make their technology work, you know, whether it's contracts or, you know, someone who's committed to work in the middle of the night or whatever. The thought is to have something that is more stable and